RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues.
Please note, this monthly strategy update was created for the 10th of August, 2024. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the podcast is published. The war in Ukraine. On land, so far this year, Russia has held the initiative and has been principally on the offensive while Ukraine has been on the defensive. Fighting has been fierce along the whole 1,000 kilometers front from Kharkiv Oblast and the Donbass in the east to Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblasts in the south. Russia has inched forward on several fronts, making most progress in Donetsk Oblast, where it is now threatening Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and the strategic logistics hub of Pokrovsk. Russia's gains of 57 square kilometers in a week in late July were the third largest since April. In June, though, Ukraine blunted a new Russian cross-border offensive in the northeast towards Kharkiv. Ukraine launched a cross-border incursion from Sumy Oblast in Ukraine's northeast into Kursk Oblast in Russia's southwest. A small mechanized force initially of some 1,000 personnel was supported by tanks, artillery and swarms of aerial drones. It penetrated into Kursk for some 10 to 25 kilometers on a reasonably wide front, seizing 45 square kilometers of Russian territory, capturing 11 settlements, and causing evacuation of the civilian population. By the 10th of August, Ukraine claimed to occupy 1,000 square kilometers. Russia conceded that a reinforced Ukrainian mechanized force had now penetrated to a depth of 12 kilometers, on a front 40 kilometers wide, and controlled 28 settlements. Russian officials presented the incursion as a notable Ukrainian escalation. President Putin said it was aimed at improving Ukraine's negotiating position at any future peace talks. Western experts saw it as a Ukrainian attempt to seize the initiative from the Russians on one part of the front and to bolster Western support for the war effort. Overall, since January, Russia has seized a further 930 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, but has done so at a very heavy cost in personnel, more than 180,000 casualties, armored vehicles and munitions, leading some Western experts to predict that Russia will be unable to sustain its current offensive for more than another couple of months. On the maritime front, Ukraine is continuing to maintain its dominant position in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. At least 15 warships, nearly half of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, have been destroyed by Ukrainian missiles and sea drones since the war began. This continues. On the 2nd of August, Ukrainian missiles sank a Russian Kilo-class attack submarine, the Rostov-on-Don, at port in Sevastopol, Crimea. Most of the Black Sea Fleet's remaining warships have been forced to relocate from Sevastopol and now the Sea of Azov to the port of Novorossiysk, over 300 kilometers away on the Russian mainland. Novorossiysk itself continues to come under Ukrainian missile and drone attack, forcing Russia to disperse some warships within the eastern Black Sea. These naval successes have enabled Ukraine to maintain the export of grain by sea, which has been vital for Ukraine's struggling economy and for food security in Africa and the Middle East. Meanwhile, Russia has continued harassing missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities and key infrastructure, energy grid and ports, exploiting Ukraine's degraded air defense umbrella. On the 31st of July, for example, Ukraine repelled one of Russia's largest drone attacks of the war, shooting down all 89 Russian drones. Nevertheless, some drones, when shot down, struck homes and infrastructure, causing considerable damage and some civilian casualties. Lack of adequate air defense measures, including fighter aircraft, remains a major issue for Ukraine. Ukraine, however, has just received the long-promised US F-16 fighter jets, but it may be some time before Ukraine's novice pilots commit them to combat. In response to such Russian attacks, Ukraine continues to launch missile and drone attacks on Russian cities near the Russia-Ukraine border, and has deployed hundreds of long-range drones to attack infrastructure targets, including airfields and oil depots, deep inside Russia. Conflicts in the Middle East. Over the last month, the international focus has been on Israel's assassination of top Hezbollah and Hamas leaders, and the expected response by Iran and its proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq and Yemen. On the 30th of July, in a targeted rocket attack in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, Israel killed the Hezbollah military commander, Fuad Shukr. Then, on the 31st of July, Hamas political leader and chief peace talks negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in the Iranian capital, Tehran, where he had just attended the inauguration of the new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. This seriously embarrassed Iran, which blamed Israel, although Israel, which claimed killing Shukr, neither claimed nor denied killing Haniyeh. Lebanon lodged a complaint with the United Nations, and both Hezbollah and Iran immediately vowed revenge. Taken together, these two well-targeted, located and timed killings appeared to be a deliberate Israeli provocation of both Lebanon and Iran at a time when the international community, and especially the United States, was trying to contain the spread of the conflict into a wider war in the Middle East. The second one, in particular, also seemed to be designed to sabotage the peace negotiations. If so, it has been successful so far, as Hamas has shown no willingness to resume the talks other than on terms unacceptable to Israel. Indeed, following the assassination of the moderate Ismail Haniyeh on the 31st of July, Hamas named the hardline Yahya Sinwar as the new overall leader of the movement, as well as the new chairman of the Hamas Political Bureau. Heretofore, Sinwar had been directing Hamas's war in Gaza and will now direct any peace negotiations. As to revenge by Iran and its proxies, the major retaliation for which Israel is preparing itself has not eventuated to date, the 10th of August. However, there have been minor drone attacks on U.S. forces in northeastern Syria. Gaza. In Gaza itself, Israel began a ground offensive there on the 27th of October, with a view to destroying Hamas and rescuing as many hostages as possible. Initially, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, focused on northern Gaza, especially Gaza City. Once the north had been subdued, the IDF then moved to southern Gaza, especially Khan Yunis. The IDF then cleared central Gaza, and since the 7th of May has been systematically clearing Rafah in the far south on the Egyptian border. Rafah had been the last remaining Hamas stronghold, and some had expected that its clearance might end the fighting. Hamas, however, re-emerged in the last 4 months in previously cleared areas of north and central Gaza. Hence, the IDF had to return to these areas and has been involved in heavy fighting in both north and central Gaza concurrent with its continuing assault on Rafah. Indeed, the war seems to have evolved from a sequence of major battles to reduce Hamas strongholds into continuous urban warfare against smaller Hamas forces throughout the Gaza Strip. While these IDF ground operations have been underway, the international community has become appalled by the ongoing loss of civilian life and mass destruction of civil infrastructure, which have accompanied the IDF assault on Gaza. Peace negotiations led by the United States, Egypt and Qatar have continued, culminating in a ceasefire plan being championed by the US. On the 11th of June, the United Nations Security Council backed this plan. The two protagonists, however, did not accept the proposal. They remain far apart on their fundamental demands. For Israel, it is the complete destruction of Hamas as a political and fighting force. For Hamas, it is the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from occupied Palestinian lands. The US, Egypt and Qatar are urging the two protagonists to return to the negotiating table, claiming there are only a couple of issues to be resolved before an interim truce could come into force. Neither side, however, has agreed to do so. Notwithstanding these diplomatic activities, the war continues apace. Israel, which has been methodically clearing Rafah, must now be close to completing the job. With Rafah surrounded and isolated, the IDF has been able to secure a buffer zone along the full length of its southern border with Egypt. This is considered important to prevent resupply of Hamas with war material from the Sinai. Nevertheless, As already noted, hummus keeps popping up in previously cleared areas across the enclave, and the IDF is forced to respond. In part to minimize infantry casualties, Israel is relying heavily on airstrikes to destroy valuable targets. With Hamas operating from a system of tunnels beneath the enclave, especially its cities and major infrastructure, such as hospitals and schools, even with the use of smart weapons, it is inevitable that collateral damage will be high. For example, on the 10th of August, an Israeli airstrike by 3 missiles hit a school-turned-humanitarian shelter in Gaza City where thousands of displaced persons were sheltering. Early Palestinian estimates indicated that more than 90 persons were killed and 47 injured. Israel advises that the strike was aimed at a Hamas command center within the school and disputes the claimed casualty numbers. It said 19 Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters were killed in the blast. According to the United Nations, it is the 21st strike on a school since July, and that 466 out of 564 Gazan schools have been directly hit or damaged to date in the 10-month war. The humanitarian situation in Gaza by the 10th of August remained extreme. More than 39,600 Gazans had been killed, of whom more than half were women and children, and 91,700 wounded since the war began. According to the Hamas-run Health Ministry, health and social services were in disarray. Key civil infrastructure had been largely destroyed, and children were dying of malnutrition as famine spread across the enclave. An indication as to the attitude of some in the Israeli government concerning these humanitarian issues came on the 5th of August, when Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich told a conference in support of Jewish settlements that it's not possible in today's global reality to manage a war. No one will allow us to starve 2 million people, even though that might be just and moral until they return the hostages. His suggestion that it might be just and moral to starve Palestinians was immediately condemned by international leaders, not least by Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who said, "The deliberate starvation of civilians is a war crime. There is no justification for it, ever. An immediate ceasefire in Gaza has never been more urgent, to protect civilians, see hostages released, and enable aid to flow. We repeat our call on all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire." In summary, the war in Gaza has evolved into asymmetric urban guerrilla warfare, which both sides may be able to sustain indefinitely at different levels of intensity, unless a peace agreement can be reached. Sudan. Sudan is a country of 50 million people, and a civil war there, which has been ongoing for 16 months, since the 15th of April, 2023, has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale comparable to, or exceeding those in Ukraine and Gaza. The civil war is between rival factions in the Sudanese military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti. Most fighting has been concentrated around the capital, Khartoum, and in the Darfur region in the country's west. Since April, intense fighting has focused on 3 regions: North Darfur, where more than 40 villages have been burned and civilians trapped with no safety or food, in El Fasher, Kordofan in central Sudan, which the RSF now largely controls, and around Khartoum and along the Blue and White Niles, where the RSF also appears to have the upper hand. On the 2nd of May, a U.S. Senate hearing estimated that the death toll could be as high as 150,000. As of the 5th of July, the war continued unabated, with the RSF having the upper hand in Darfur and Khartoum, with the SAF operating from Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast and seeking to challenge the RSF in its strongholds. Some 7.7 million had been internally displaced, more than 2.1 million had fled the country as refugees, and perhaps up to 25 million, half the population, were facing starvation. The UN World Food Programme now considers this to be the world's largest hunger crisis. More than half the population is now experiencing crisis levels of hunger. Multiple areas are at risk of famine, and on the 1st of August famine was confirmed in a camp sheltering hundreds of thousands of displaced people in North Darfur. Indonesia. Australia and Indonesia are poised to sign an upgraded defence pact by the end of this month. Prabowo Subianto, a former general who is Indonesia's defence minister and incoming president, is expected to visit Canberra within the next 2 weeks. The new agreement will help build closer security ties between Canberra and Jakarta, but Indonesia is not expected to ditch its non-aligned foreign policy nor its concerns about the AUKUS agreement. Papua New Guinea. A major landslide in a remote part of the PNG highlands has created a humanitarian disaster on Australia's doorstep. On the 28th of May, heavy rain caused the side of an enormous mountain to give way, killing more than 160 people in the Mulataka district of Enga province. The landslide also cut off the only road into the gold mining town of Porgera, home to 100,000 people. Porgera's population is entirely dependent on store-bought food and goods, so the cutting of its main supply route has forced up the cost of supplies, creating a cost of living emergency. For more than 2 months, the only way to get food, medicine and other supplies into Porgera has been by carrying them over the landslide on foot. Local men are acting as taxes, transporting the goods across the landslide at cost $8 for a 20 kilograms bag of rice. The provincial government is building a bypass road around the landslide, but it is proving difficult and slow-going. AUKUS. AUKUS is the Australia, United Kingdom, United States Trilateral Security Partnership signed in September 2021, an agreement to jointly develop advanced military technology, Pillar 1 of which relates to building a nuclear-powered attack submarine, SSN, and Pillar 2 of which relates to other advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, hypersonic missiles and quantum technologies. In early August, it was announced that there had been an update to the AUKUS agreement. The key changes affect Pillar 1. The agreement now will allow naval nuclear propulsion plants, rather than just nuclear propulsion information, to be transferred to Australia. The submarine project can be cancelled with 1 year's notice, if either the US or the UK decides the deal weakens its own nuclear submarine programs, and Australia will indemnify the UK and the US against any loss or injury connected to nuclear materials that have been transferred to Australia. The deal will last until 2075 provided the ANZUS alliance continues and the US and the UK remain in NATO. Long-range strike capability. Australia's 2023 Defence Strategic Review emphasised the need for Australia to be able to hold an enemy at risk and at longer distance from Australia. Long-range missiles were to be an important means of doing this. To this end, the Royal Australian Navy has demonstrated its long-range strike capability. In a military exercise, Exercise RIMPAC 24, in the Pacific near Hawaii in July, the air warfare destroyer, HMAS Sydney, successfully tested its new naval strike missile, the so-called Standard Missile 6, SM-6. The SM-6 is expected to replace the aging Harpoon weapon system in the inventory, and both the Hobart-class air warfare destroyers and Anzac-class frigates will be equipped with it.
This strategic update was produced by David Leese, Chair of the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest. A more detailed strategic review is published each month in RUSI's newsletter, which is available on the RUSI New South Wales website. Thank you.